Good morning. Good to see such a large increase on our attendance. If you paid any attention when you came in, if you looked up on the board, you'll see Brother Anthony has kept track every week. And was it 6 last week, Brother Anthony, or 5? 5, okay. Well, we're glad you're here. That's a great increase. And I am glad to see all of you. I've missed seeing every one of you, missed being here. Was glad when I could just come and be here. But it's such a blessing to even be able to be out today and see all of you that are here. And we're glad you are. And if you want to wear a mask, wear a mask. And if you don't want to, you don't have to. And like Brother Jimmy said, I don't know what's going on behind that mask. I don't. But, I thought about this when he said that. Even if you don't have a mask on, I don't know what's going on behind that face. Some of you could be thinking awful bad thoughts. I don't know. But we're glad that you're here. Good to see all of you. And God has absolutely been good to us through all of this, hasn't he? I mean, he really has. We know of a few people that have contracted the virus and, have overcome. And we're glad that they have. And we've lost several down in the little county that I live in. I think 101 as of Tuesday. I think 101 people have passed or had it in the community I live in, and I think it's 19 or 20 that have passed away from it. That's pretty good number for a small community like I live in. But God is still God, and we're going to read today in the book of 1 Kings, chapter 17. I mentioned part of this story here. I didn't go back and look and try to figure out when I talked about this. We're going to talk about the prophet Elijah. And, we count him as one of the great prophets, and he is a great prophet. I mean, but he's not talked about a whole lot. I don't know if you know it or not, but he's not really talked about all that much in the Old Testament. As a matter of fact, right here in 1 Kings 17 is when we're first introduced to Elijah the prophet. We don't know anything about him before then. We know quite a bit about him after this. But he comes on the scene just very abruptly. And to kind of lay the stage for you here, he is a prophet to the northern kingdom of Israel. Israel never really had a time of revival. The southern kingdom of Judah would have a good king, they'd have a bad king, and every time they had a good king, they would have a period of what we would call revival. The northern kingdom, after it was split, and Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, when he took over up there, it was just a continuous problem. They rejected God, they neglected God. Jeroboam set them up places to worship, and by the time we get down to Ahab, who is the arch rival, I guess I could say, of Elijah, the country is in a mess. Ahab was perhaps the worst king they ever had, and as bad as he was, his wife Jezebel was worse. She's the one that brought in all of the prophets of Baal and the prophets of the grove, and we all know that story, don't we, of the showdown on Mount Carmel. This is long before that. But the country, the nation was very negligent of any knowledge of God, and God has tried to get their attention many times, and they're not listening. And, I don't know that God's not trying to get our attention. Okay, maybe he is. I don't know. But let's jump in here and read. And really it's kind of two stories we're going to read. It's the story of Elijah, and yet it involves two settings, okay? And one of them we did talk about here a week or so ago. I don't think it was last week, maybe in the week before. 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 1. And we'll read down through verse 16. And Elijah the Tishbite, who was of the inhabitants of Gilead, said unto Ahab, As the Lord God of Israel liveth, before whom I stand, there shall be no dew nor rain these years, but according to my word. And the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, Get thee hence, and turn thee eastward, and hide thyself by the brook Cherith, that is before Jordan. And it shall be that thou shalt drink of the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed thee there. So he went and did according unto the word of the Lord, For he went and dwelt by the brook Cherith, that is before Jordan. And the ravens brought him bread and flesh in the morning, and bread and flesh in the evening, and he drank of the brook. And it came to pass after a while that the brook dried up, because there had been no rain in the land. And the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, Arise, get thee to Zarephath that belongeth to Zidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow woman there to sustain thee. So he arose and went to Zarephath, and when he came to the gate of the city, behold, the widow woman was there gathering of sticks. And he called to her and said, Fetch me, I pray thee, a little water in a vessel, that I may drink. And as she was going to fetch it, he called to her and said, Bring me, I pray thee, a morsel of bread in thine hand. And she said, As the Lord thy God liveth, I have not a cake, but an handful of meal in a barrel, and a little oil in a cruse. And behold, I am gathering 2 sticks, that I may go in and dress it for me and for my son, that we may eat it and die. And Elijah said unto her, Fear not, go and do as thou hast said, but make me thereof a little cake first, and bring it unto me, and after make for thee and for thy son. For thus saith the Lord God of Israel, the barrel of meal shall not waste, neither shall the cruse of oil fail unto the day that the Lord sendeth rain upon the earth. And she went and did according to the saying of Elijah, and she and he and her house did eat many days. And the barrel of meal wasted not, neither did the cruse of oil fail, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake by Elijah. Now, I know I used this a few weeks ago because I got a text from somebody here in the church who is an obvious Hoosier. And you might want to know why, because I made mention when I was using this as an example in preaching, I called it a hoe cake. And the text just simply said, hoe cake, ? I said, it's a southern thing, you wouldn't get it. That's not what we're going to preach about today, okay? It's not what we're going to preach about. A lot of things in here that have been preached that I have personally preached about, and I even thought as I studied this week, this might be a good story that we could just take and you could make a series out of this. That's the way my mind runs all the time. About 2 weeks ago, I was working, and as I work a lot of times, my mind tends to wander, and I think about things, and I pray, and I had sat down to take a little break, and a thought came into my mind. I wonder what Elijah was doing. What was he doing the whole time that he is down by the brook Cherith? He has no TV. He has no telephone. He has no books to read, no newspapers and magazines to read. And it's quite obvious there's nobody else there. What did he do the whole time he's sitting down by that brook? I don't have the answer. I really don't know. But I thought, we have a lot of people that are experiencing some anxiety because they have been asked to stay in their home. And we have all of those things, don't we? I'm sure that some of you we couldn't classify as huge television watchers, probably spent more time in front of the tube than you have in a long time. Some of you that might not be really into reading very much have probably read more than you've read in a long time, haven't you? You've found something to, and I don't want to trivialize this, but occupy your time, right? You probably have. And if I could guess, I'm going to say that after a couple of weeks of being shut in, you've sort of got used to it. As I heard from one wife as folks were coming in today, you need to be thankful that I got my husband to put on clothes. He's wore pajamas all week. I'm not going to give that away who said that, but, I can picture that being true. As a matter of fact, the Sunday that I was here, Anthony came in with a pair of pajama bottoms on. Messing with me. That's the way that young preacher is. And I laughed and said, "Are you going to Walmart?" He said, "No, I'm just messing with you." He said, "I got my jeans on underneath this." But you know what I'm saying, okay? We've gotten used. We may not like our circumstance that we're in right now, but by and large, we've kind of got used to it, haven't we? And if you're like me, and I've kind of thought about this more this week than ever, I'm very predictable in my daily routine. Get up at the same time, we'll eat about the same time and probably eat about the same foods and we go to the same places. And don't we have lives that really are kind of structured? And even though we've been locked in quite a bit lately and we've been separated from one another, if we stop and consider our normal, what we call our normal daily lives, they're pretty mundane, aren't they? We've gotten used to doing things the same way over and over again. And we are so accustomed to it. I think that's what aggravated us when they said you need to stay home. Not that it was going to hurt any of us to stay home, okay? Not that some of you don't stay home anyway. We just didn't want to be told you got to stay home. Right? Think with me now on this line that I'm thinking about here with Elijah. I don't know anything about him up to this point. Nobody does. But when he comes on the scene, he comes on strong as the man of God who lets Ahab know immediately that until I say so, there's not going to be any rain or any dew in this country. Now, farmers kind of freak when they go for a week and don't have rain. I cannot imagine what this country around here would look like if it didn't rain for 3.5 years. You can't either. We wouldn't know, would we? But Elijah doesn't even give that message, how long it's going to be. I think one of our frustrations during this whole coronavirus thing, and it's still out there, by the way, okay? That's why some of you are wearing masks, and we're cleaning our church extra and everything, okay? Because it's still out there. And it may be out here a long time. It may never go away. I don't know, okay? But we're dealing with it, and that's all right. But we were told right up front, if you'll stay home for 14 days and flatten the curve, it'll all be good. We'll let you out. Everybody remember that? See, when I've asked questions the last 4 weeks, nobody's spoke to me at all, Jimmy's been sitting over here, and Greg's back in the booth, and Anthony's kind of been sitting back there, and, once in a while, I think they even fell asleep on me, but we were good with 14 days, right? Then it's, it didn't work as well as we thought, so here's another 14 days. And then, it's 30 days, right? And we got a little frustrated with it, but we were obedient, by and large. Now, not everybody was. I know you weren't. I never was obedient. I never was good. I went out and went to work every day, but I worked by myself, so it's okay, Can you imagine how Elijah felt, secluded from everybody and everything, and he is sitting by this little brook. Now, this is not what we would call a creek, or some of you call up here in Indiana a creek. And I learned as a young person that's the same thing, a creek and a creek. It just depends on where you're at, okay? It's not a big body of water. It's not a river. This is a little stream, okay? That's all it is. It's a brook. It's a little stream. And Elijah is there, and I don't know how long he's there. Do you know that? Do you realize we don't read in here how long he's there? Do you understand it could have been a year? It could have been 2 years. It could have been 3 years into this thing. We don't know how long Elijah is here by this brook. And while he's there and he's all by himself, and my mind still says, what was he doing all by himself there for all that period of time? And I don't know, okay? I'm sure I'll find a preacher somewhere that'll preach someday what he was doing there, just like they preach about what Jesus wrote in the dirt and they don't have a clue, okay? But somebody will preach what he was doing. I don't know, but I know this. His life was not near as exciting as yours while you've been locked down. All he had to look forward to every day is to get up, walk over to the brook, probably wash his face and hands, get him a drink of water, and he waited each day in the morning and the evening for birds to bring him food. That's all he had every day. But I can assure you of this, even though that's all he had, he was living. He was still alive. I have a feeling, and this is just my thinking, I think he probably did a lot of talking to God. I'd say they talked a whole lot. Wouldn't you think so? And I'm going to guess that you have gotten fairly comfortable with this idea of social distancing and staying at home and all that stuff. And actually, it's become kind of normal to you again, right? Kind of. Some of you look at me like, what are you talking about? Okay, so I never changed my routine. You didn't either, right? Some of you didn't. Some of you got up and went to work and went on. I know some of you did. We got a couple of nurses here today, and I know they went to work, okay? I know they did. And some of the rest of you did too. But it's different, right? But we've kind of got used to it. Can you picture this with me? Elijah got used to being by himself. I'm talking about all by himself. And he got used to every day the same routine over and over. So much so that became his normal life. He thought of nothing different. This is just what I do. Every day I get up. The ravens bring me meat. They bring me bread. I got water. I'm alive. I'm well. God's still with me. I'm talking to God. Everything's great. And then one day he gets up and the brook has dried up. Just dried up. That's what we're going to talk about today. When the brook dries up. It's a great thing that he got used to it, and it's a great thing that he had water and the ravens were bringing him food, and life was just going on, and it was so good, and then all of a sudden, he gets up one day, and because of the drought, it's not rained, and I don't know how long, but it's not rained, the brook dries up. Now what do we do? Well, let's define what we're talking about when we talk about the brook drying up. You guys know what a brook is, okay? But I want to look beyond that definition of a brook. What about we look at this brook? Could it be brought as an example of maybe employment, a job that you've got? Some of you have lost employment before, I'm sure, okay? Lots of people have been laid off and lost their employment during this whole mess, right? And what they normally did every day and the pride that they had going. And I know some people say they hate their job, and if they do, let me give you some advice. Go find you one you don't hate. Okay? But the majority of people like what they're doing, and it brings them money. And you know, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, beyond your control, you lost income. That can happen not just because of the virus, but there are some of you sitting here today that have lost your job, that you had no control over it. It's gone. You don't have employment anymore. That's like a brook drying up to Elijah. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay? There are relationships that have ended just like that. Now, let me tell you something. When I talk about relationship here, I don't want anybody here to get the idea, well, my marriage stinks right now. It's dried up. Suck it up, Buttercup. You made a commitment to that one. You work that one out. But there are other relationships, right? Could be just a friendship. Could be what we call the romantic relationship today, that things seem to be going so good, and then just all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it ended. And you might not have even seen it coming. I wonder if Elijah saw this brook drying up every day. You know, if it dries up a little at a time, you don't pay much attention. But that happens, doesn't it? The brook dries up. Social interaction is one of those things, isn't it? It's hit us all. We're so used to interacting with people. How many of you here are what you would call a social individual? You just have to be around people. Got to have the huggers. Boy, we're just dying right now. We are, you know. And I'm one of them, and you know that, okay? We're like, oh, I got to hug somebody, you know. I'm the only one that's gone in all this time to see my parents, and they're huggers too. Okay, I mean, the grandkids have tried to stay away, and the great-grandkids, and you know, it's hurting us, right? We're like, got to have that hug, and we ain't scared. We just got to have a hug. If we die hugging, we'll be dying happy, okay? Relationships, don't they end sometimes? I mean, I've seen young couples that were on the verge of getting married. I know of one young couple that I was supposed to do their wedding. I was there on practice night. Everybody seemed to be doing good. Everything was going well. The next morning, I got a call and said, well, mark that wedding off. I said, well, why? Well, one of them changed their mind in the middle of the night, and they ain't getting married no more. Relationship, boom, gone. That brook dried up. You understand what I'm saying here? Okay? It might be your physical ability could just end, right? Most of us here are relatively healthy. We're taking care of ourselves. We're getting around. Listen, I know people that have had a stroke and their ability just ends just like that. Right, Brother Jimmy Wheeler? I mean, he's recovered, thank God. But for a while, it didn't look like Jimmy was going to go again, okay? Just ends. All of a sudden, you have to question, why did this happen? What's going on in my life? You guys understand what I'm talking about when I say the brook dried up now? It could be a lot of other things. I'm just going to mention those 4 today, okay? But it could be a lot of other things in your life that you're going along, and it's just become a normal, natural part of your life, and all of a sudden, it ends. Just like Elijah got up one day and there was no water in the brook. How did you react to that? How do you react when your brook dries up? I'll tell you how a lot of people act. They're angry. They're angry. We see a lot of that going on right now with what they call demonstrations that have now turned into riots, which is nothing more than a bunch of stubborn, spoiled kids that should have been spanked when they were young. My opinion. It's not going the way I want it to. And since it's not going the way I want it to, I'm going to throw a fit. I want my way. How many people's like that? I just can't picture Elijah doing this. That's my brook. Where's my water, God? It's been my brook. This is my place. God, I deserve that. Give me my water back. I'm happy here. Don't dry up my brook. That's mine. Anybody here act that way? Don't raise your hand. That's the reaction a lot of us have, isn't it? We become angry. We become possessive of what we thought was ours and what we thought we were in control of. But you know what? That's a rude awakening. You're not really in control. Not of your employment, not of your relationship, not of your social interaction, not of your physical well-being. You're not really in control. So what do you do when the brook dries up? What do you do? How do you react? I've heard it said by more than one person, and I'm sure somebody originated this quote, but I can't remember who it is, but I've heard it said by more than one person that life is 20% of what happens to you and 80% how you react to it. That's probably about right. You know that? Yeah. Here's Elijah. Things are just fine. Nobody's bothering him. He's just hanging out down there, just him and God. And he gets up one morning and his brook is dried up. Just like things have dried up in your life. I don't know how he reacted to it. I really don't. But I think he had a close enough connection between him and God that he didn't get angry and he didn't throw a little fit. I don't think he did. See, that's what a lot of people will do. Elijah's being fed. I mean, I've read right down here, the ravens brought him bread and flesh in the morning and bread and flesh in the evening, and he drank water of the brook. What happens to you? How do you react when your world suddenly falls apart? Because that's what's happened to a lot of people right now, right? I read what Job said. And I'll say this again. We all like to read Job whenever we're going through something. And I know why. Because we like to read about a person who's got it worse than we do. That's the only reason we read Job. Why, if Job can do it, I can too. Well, prove that, okay? Job lost his children, all of them. It's a terrible thing to lose one child, let alone all of them at the same time. Lost all of his children at one time. Lost all of his cattle at one time. Lost all of his crops at one time. Does it sound like Job's brook dried up? I'm not talking about over a long period of time. All of this happened in a day to Brother Job. And we know how Job reacted to this thing. How did he react? Here's what Job said. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In periodicals that I get about preaching and counseling and all that stuff, there are more people in the church world today who have anxiety and are calling for counseling and talking to the pastor than there ever has been in the past, because they don't have anything to hold on to. Why? Because their brook has dried up and they feel privileged. They feel like they deserve to have their little brook of water. It should have never dried up. It was mine. I deserve that. I worked for that. I earned that, or at least it's mine because somebody gave it to me, and you ought not to take it away from me. And they have anxiety. You know what I got to ask those people? Where is your faith? Where's your faith? Now, if I'm talking to you, you don't have to show it. That's okay. I don't worry about those things, because someday I'm leaving here. Not to drive back to Kentucky. No, I'm leaving here. Okay? I'm leaving Earth one of these days. And whether it's today or next week or next month or next year, I'm leaving. And all this other stuff is temporary. Even all the little brooks that I enjoy, the employment and the physical ability that I've got and the interaction and the relationships I've got with people, I love it, I appreciate it, I'm enjoying life, and I'm going to enjoy it as long as I can. But one of these days, that's all going to come to an end. And I'm not worried about it. I'm not worried about it. God's given it to me. God can take it away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Elijah here has seen what happens here when the brook dries up. He has been told to go there. He's waiting right there. Elijah's brook has dried up. What are you going to do when your brook dries up? Are you going to throw the little fit? Are you going to demand something from God? See, too many of us think that God is the keeper of our wish list. So what do you mean? Well, think about it. Think about your own prayer life with me just for a minute, would you? You know, we've talked, I mentioned it fairly regular here at Edinburgh Church, that there are 3 realms of prayer. You know, we got the realm of communion where you talk with God. I think Elijah and God had that. Boy, they talked a lot. Then we have the realm of petition, and that's the one we like. You know what that one is? That's where we ask for stuff. Just test yourself when you start praying next time. Do you ever just talk to God as if He was your best friend? I hope you do. That's communion. Boy, that's a sweet realm to get into. Did you know that? That is great. I can picture Elijah and God just talking like best friends, can't you? Petition, we like that. And test yourself. Watch this. When you go to pray, and I don't know how you address God, whether you say Heavenly Father or Dear God or whatever. However you answer Him, what's the first thing you do after that? God, I need this. God, I want you to do that. Like your grocery shopping, okay? You got your list all in front of you, and you just hand it to God and say, God, I want you to take care of this, okay? And when God doesn't take care of it, then you're all hurt and you're all bothered and you're all disappointed. But let me tell you what, some of that stuff you probably didn't need anyway. Some of it you could have done for yourself, but you want God to handle it all. Am I getting too mean today? No, I'm just being honest with you. Your brook's dried up in some places, and you want God to fix it, right? Let me tell you something. Elijah could have done that. God wasn't going to fix the brook. No. God allowed that brook to dry up. Do you believe God was in control of the brook? I believe He was. I believe God could have kept water trickling down that brook all 3.5 years if He wanted to. I think He could have. You see, why do you think that? Listen, he had birds bringing food to Elijah. If you can get a bird to do anything, you can keep water in a brook. Okay? I mean, they had to bring quite a bit because this man was living off of it. I want you to know that even though the brook dried up, God was still in control. God could have kept water in the brook. God could have kept you in that job that you liked, that you lost. God could have kept you in the relationship that gave you comfort and made you feel so good. He could have kept you in that relationship, couldn't he? He could have. God could have kept you in your circle of friends and all your social interaction. He could have kept you living right where you used to live and you liked it so much. God could have kept you there. Right? He could have. The physical abilities that you used to have, and I have to confess over and over again, I don't have them like I used to. I mean, I don't. I was up on the 3rd floor Friday working on the roof, working on something that they wanted me to build on top of this, and the boss sent me a text about noon, and he said, are you still on the roof? I said, no. He said, good. I was afraid you was going to fall. I was hoping you wouldn't fall. I just sent him a text back and said, me too. Now, 20 years ago, I wouldn't have thought about it, but I'm standing up there now thinking, boy, I hope I don't fall. It's a long way to the ground. Boy, it's going to hurt, My physical abilities are not what they used to be. I recognize that, okay? Could God have kept me strong? Listen, the Bible said that Moses, when he was 120 years old, was just as strong. He was just as agile. He was just as healthy as he had been when he was 20 years old. Can God do that? Absolutely he can. And so you have to ask yourself, well, why does he let my brook dry up then? Why all of a sudden do things that I'm counting on and I like and my life is all wrapped around, why all of a sudden does my brook dry up? Are you asking yourself that right now? Some of you are. I'll tell you why, because God's got a different plan. That's why your brook dried up. Elijah would have stayed there the whole time without ever leaving. I don't think Elijah's a man that likes confrontation with Ahab and Jezebel. I wouldn't. I think he's totally happy sitting there. He's got food. He's got water. He's got shelter somewhere. If he hasn't built him something by now, there's something wrong with him. He could be even living in a cave. I don't know. But he's got all the necessities of life right there, doesn't he? Shelter, water, food. Everything's good. Nobody's bothering him. He don't have to put up with nothing. That sounds like paradise to me. How many of you have seen on Facebook, that little picture of that cabin? You can live here and have $1 million for the rest of your life if you never watch football. Give it to me. One of them said a year or two ago, I showed this little cabin down by a brook. You can live here if you never look on Facebook again. I said, give me the cabin. Tranquil life, perfect life, wonderful. Elijah could have lived like that and been happy the rest of his life. But guess what? God had another plan for Elijah. See, this is why our brook dries up. We're happy, we're content, we're satisfied. But listen, as C.S. Lewis said one time, and I've thought about it, I didn't really like it the first time I read this quote that I'm going to give you from C.S. Lewis. But here's what he said. You have no right to happiness. I said, man, get out of here. But then I thought about it. You know what? We don't. Think about it. What does the Declaration of Independence even say? It doesn't say we have a right to happiness. It says we have a right to pursue happiness. C.S. Lewis said you don't have a right to happiness, only an obligation to fulfill God's will. I don't think Elijah was happy when he woke up that morning and there was no water in the brook. I think he was probably a little upset, disappointed to say the least, don't you? But you know why it dried up? God's got another plan. I don't care what your brook is, whether it's employment, whether it's a relationship, whether it's social interaction with all your friends and the things that you're involved with, or whether it's physical ability. If it all of a sudden comes to a stop, think about this. God's got something else for you to do. People are always talking about either being on the mountaintop or being in the valley. And we all get all blue and all down and out, when we're going through the valley. Well, think about this. On the other side of the valley is another mountaintop. You get to go up that one. God's got something for you to do when your brook dries up. God had something more for Elijah to do when his brook dried up, and God wasn't finished with him yet. Immediately we read, that's the next part of the story. That's why I wanted to read on past verse 7, is so you'll understand when the brook dried up, God knows it's going to dry up. God let it dry up. God lets things dry up in your life. I look back on my life and I thank God for some relationships that dried up. I'm glad they did, because I've seen the direction they went, and I'm glad I didn't go there. I'm glad I didn't go. Didn't need to go there. I'm glad that the social interaction that I had with people before I was saved, when I got saved, that dried up. Yeah. That's not the kind of people I want to hang around with. We're not going to get into social ability. I mean, physical ability, I'd still kind of like to have some of that, okay? But I've heard some of you say when you've seen kids, I wish I had their energy. No, you don't. You would hurt yourself now. See where I'm coming from? These things happen for a reason. Our brook dries up for a reason. But listen, it's no time to throw up our hands and quit or get upset with God or get arrogant and beg Him to give us water back in our brook. It's time to look and say, God, what do you got next for me? Where do I go next? What do I do next? Are you willing to make the changes necessary to fulfill God's will in your life? He may have to cut you off in one place in order to get you to go somewhere else, just like He did Elijah. But God had already, did you notice in the story that we read, God said, Elijah, go down to Zarephath, because I've already talked to a widow woman down there, and she's going to take care of you. God had prearranged what was going to happen next. Do you think God cared more about Elijah than He does you? No, He knows the direction you need to go. You might just be too content and too satisfied with where you're standing or where you're sitting, and God may indeed dry your brook up so that you will look and see the direction God wants you to go in. God works that way sometimes. Why? Because as long as we're being fed, and as long as we're sheltered, and as long as we've got water to drink, we're not too concerned with what God wants us to do next. This is why we grow when we're spiritually in the valley. When we're on the mountaintop, oftentimes we forget all about God. Why? Because everything's going good. It's all perfect. I don't need to worry about anything. It's all running good. And then all of a sudden, something will fall apart. Your brook just dried up, and God's got your attention now. I'm not self-sufficient. I can't take care of all these things myself. Circumstances come that I'm not in control of. When are we going to wake up and understand that God's trying to get our attention? And it's quite likely that God's already got things laid out in another direction that you need to go. He already had it laid out for Elijah. It's always interested me, and I've never preached on this point, but I'm going to one of these days when He lets me. How that Elijah left a place where he was fed every day the birds, and I don't know where they got bread and meat. I wouldn't even ask, would you? I'd just take it. Some of you would be going, well, that don't pass FDA specifications. I bet somebody didn't wash their hands for the bird stole the food. We're talking about a bird bringing him food, okay? But he had food. And he ran out of water, right? But God sent him to a place where obviously there's plenty of water, because when he looks at the widow woman and says, get me water, she's like, no problem, I can get you water. And he said, while you're gone, get me some bread too. She said, now that's a problem. So he leaves a place where there's food and no water, and goes to a place where there's water and no food. I'm going to preach on that one of these days, if God will let me. But right now we're talking about his brook drying up. But God had other plans for Elijah, doesn't He? God had to get him away from the brook Cherith in order to get him back in society and doing what God wanted him to do. Elijah had to have a complete turnaround in his life. Has your life ever been turned around? That's what happens when you get born again, isn't it? Yeah. The brook that you were so used to living with dries up in your life, and you know what? You've got a new direction. You've got a new reason to live. You've got a new way to go. You got more things you need to do for God. Listen, we take so candidly what God had done for other people and the calls that He made in other people's lives. I've thought over and over again for many years, how would it have been to be a disciple and doing my job that I had done all of my life? Think about it. Andrew and Peter and James and John had fished all their whole life long. That's all they knew. That's all they ever planned to do. And along comes Jesus one day and says, "Follow me. I'll make you fishers of men." What did they have to do? They had to quit. That part of their life dried up. They had to go somewhere else. A little later, He walks by Matthew, who's got what we would call a good job. He's working for the government. He's collecting taxes. If he's dishonest, he can collect more than he's supposed to and put that in his pocket. We don't know about Eli. We don't know about Matthew in that case, but he's got a job probably with retirement. And Jesus walks by and looks at him and says, "Follow me." What did those guys do? They followed Him. They dropped everything and they followed Him. You see, God had a different plan for their life, just like He might have for you, just like He has had for me. He's dried many brooks up in my life. But every time He has, there's always another door of opportunity that's open. And it's not always that perfect opportunity. I'm telling you, Elijah, today we'd hear preachers say, well, God took him away from a bad situation where he had food and his water ran out and took him over here to Zarephath, where there was all kind of good stuff. Well, that's not the way it worked. No, he still had to rely on God. I'll let you guys study on that at home, okay? I ain't going to preach that one out. But think about that. The brook drying up got him back where God wanted him to be. Even the Apostle Paul, think about it for a minute. In Acts chapter 9, you can read about Paul. He thinks he's doing God's will. God has literally been working in the life of the man named Saul of Tarsus all of his whole life, and Saul didn't know it, but he's learned the Word of God. He's learned all about Judaism and about the Son of God whenever he's going to come. He missed it the first time, but on the road to Damascus, when God strikes him down, his brook dried up. How do I know? Because I read over in the book of Philippians where Paul said, all that stuff that was gained to me, I counted it loss for the excellency of the knowledge of Jesus Christ. I've said it here at this church before, been a couple of years, but Paul had to lose his religion in order to become a Christian. His brook dried up. His life had to change. The people he hung around with, his whole social atmosphere had to change. All of it. Even in his life of serving God, do you know that God closed doors on the Apostle Paul? Read over there in Acts chapter 16 when you get home. Yeah, he had it all laid out everywhere he wanted to go, and I can't remember all the names right now. I'd have to turn over there and look. But Paul had it all planned out wherever he wanted to go, and he's thinking in his mind, probably playing God, I'm going to go over here, and God says, no, I don't want you to go over there. And we don't read where Paul asked why. He just said, well, if I can't go over there, I'll go over here. God said, no, don't want you to go over there. And I assure you that Paul said, here's a man that's well organized. He said, now, wait a minute, God, we've been working together so good here all these years. Why now are you telling me I can't go there? And we still don't have the answer. I heard one really smart, intelligent preacher say about a year ago, the reason why Paul was not allowed to go to that place is because there was sin there. I thought, man, you need to wake up. Everywhere Paul went, there was sin. He brought the gospel to people that had never heard it before. There was sin all over the world. That's not why he wasn't supposed to go there. You know why he wasn't supposed to go there? It wasn't Paul's job. Or it wasn't his time. Just don't go there. But he wants to go, and yet God's saying, no, his brook's dried up. No, you can't go there. I know that you've got good information. There's lost people over there, but no, you can't go there, Paul. You can't go there. So you know what he did? He just kept praying and kept hanging in there. And if you'll read over there in Acts chapter 16, you'll find this out, that Paul saw in a vision in the night a man of Macedonia saying, come over to Macedonia and help us. And Luke's with him. Because it says this over there, okay? In Acts chapter 16, I tell you, go home and read it. Luke says we endeavored immediately to go to Macedonia. Why? Because even in the life of the great apostle Paul, God had closed some doors. He dried up a brook, said, nope, can't go there. But Paul never quit. What I'm going to tell you is this: when your brook dries up, don't quit. God's got something else for you to do. Do it. Follow it. Be willing to make the necessary changes. Okay? Be willing. Later on in the life of Paul, he knows that he needs to go to Jerusalem. He doesn't know why he needs to go to Jerusalem. He just needs to go to Jerusalem. And so he starts heading that way. And he makes the comment at one point, and I think it's at Ephesus where he's talking to those people. And they don't want him to go because they realize that he could be in trouble when he gets down there. They might arrest him. They might do something to him. But Paul said, I can't help it. I've got to go. He said, I am ready right now when I go to Jerusalem, not just to be put into jail, but I'm ready to die if that's what I need to do for Jesus Christ. And he said in another place on his way there, he said, I don't know what's going to happen, but the Spirit says it's not going to be pretty when I get there. But it's probably pain and suffering. But it'll be all right. Paul had to be moved by God. You and I have to be moved by God. Occasionally, God dries up our brook. We all, I'm going to come down to an end. I know you're tired of hearing me preaching, okay? You ain't sat this long and heard a preacher, because when you're on Facebook, you can pause and come back if you want, okay? Or turn off if you want to. We all want to follow the path of least resistance, don't we? We all get comfortable in our little life, and we really don't want anybody to shake up what's going on. We want to follow that little path of least resistance. We'd like to be like Elijah, where, boy, all I got to do is God's going to give me water and God's going to give me food. I don't have to put up with nothing or nobody. I'm just going to be happy as a little lark right here. We want to follow the path of least resistance, don't we? Don't you? I mean, you can nod your head if you want to, or say no if you don't want to. But if you're shaking your head no, I'm going to question you after church, because I know. We're people. We want to follow the path of least resistance. But what did David say in the 23rd Psalm? Sometimes he leads us through the valley of the shadow of death, doesn't he? Now, that don't mean you're going to die, but it's a scary time. Do you ever go through scary times in your life? Has God ever closed the door and you're like, what am I going to do next? And you just hang right in there. I assure you, God will open another door. David said, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, behold, thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Even when the brooks dried up, Elijah held on to God. And the next thing David said, and I wouldn't look forward to this either, but it's in there. We may as well approach it and say something about it today. He said, thou preparest a table before me, where? In the presence of mine enemies. I'm sure David didn't want to be there in the presence of his enemies, did he? You don't want to go someplace where there might be trouble, where there might be obstacles, where you may have to struggle. You don't want to do that. But guess what? That might be just where God needs you to be. Might be. That's why Paul had to be arrested. God had told him when he was converted, he said, you're going to testify to kings, to rulers. Do you know when Paul testified to kings and rulers? After he got arrested. His brook dried up of the easy work of going from town to town and preaching the message. And listen to me, being thrown in jail at Philippi was easier than being in chains from the Roman government and being hauled off to Rome. Paul had to go. Isn't that right? David said, thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. What else did he say? Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. Listen, God's got a plan for us, and we've got to be willing to accept when the brook dries up. We may not know which way to go next, and I don't think Elijah did. But I can tell you this, if you have the proper relationship with God, He'll point you in the direction you need to go. And you might be like Paul and say, now wait a minute, God, I'm not just sure about that, but if that's where you want me to go, that's where I'll go. Okay? I don't have time this morning, or it wouldn't take time, I'll put it that way, to explain to you that there's been times in my life my brook's dried up more than once. And there's been times I've went places I didn't want to go. The very first church I pastored had a wedding there last night. Yeah. It was a good wedding, pretty wedding. There's never been an ugly bride. Did you know that? Cute little girl come here. I've watched this boy grow up all of his life. Watched his mother grow up all of her life. She was a young child when I went to Walnut Hill Church. I didn't want to go to Walnut Hill Church. That was the biggest church in South Kentucky, and I'm like, God, I ain't going there. God said, that's where I want you to go. I said, I don't want to go. I don't care what you want. I don't want to go. So I began to ask God, and I began to look deeper, and I found a little church I preached at one time, and boy, I wanted to go down there so bad. I loved it. I fit right in. I'm thinking, boy, this would be great right here for a young preacher to start in, and God just kept saying, I want you to go to Walnut Hill. And I kept saying, I don't want to go to Walnut Hill. Everybody heard of Gideon putting out the fleece? I put out the fleece. I said, God, if you want me to go to Walnut Hill, I was working in Greensburg on a factory down there called Greensburg Manufacturing, put a roof up on there. Didn't know a soul in that building, didn't know very many people in Greensburg, and I thought I had God on this one. I said, God, if you want me to go to Walnut Hill Church, you let 3 people mention the word Walnut Hill today. You think he didn't? I had some wonderful years at Walnut Hill Church because God closed other doors. He dried up the brook and said, here's where I want you to be. If God's dried up your brook, how are you going to react? What will you do when life as you know it suddenly changes and you don't know what to do next? What will you do? How are you going to react? I'm going to tell you, you need to trust God. You need to accept the direction that he's pointing you in. You see, God knew. Brother Dan, get us a song together if you want to. We'll have an invitational song here in the end, okay? But see, God knew with Elijah here. God knew this widow that he was going to go be with, and I hope you go home and read this story a little further. God knew this widow needed him because she's about out of food. And God knew that if she had the faith and he had the faith, they'd be food. Further, God knew that this widow's son was going to die, and Elijah needed to be there to raise him back to life. God knew that. God knew that Elijah needed to get back out of seclusion and back in society so that he could confront Ahab and Jezebel, and we could have that great story of the showdown on top of Mount Carmel. And none of that would have happened if God would have let him sit by that little brook and drink the water and eat from the ravens. Sometimes our brook dries up so God can move us to greater things. And I'm glad you're back today. And some of you probably feel like, man, you don't understand. My brook really dried up. I mean, I'm sitting at home. I can't do anything. I can't go out. You know, you huggers are going, I'm about to die for a hug here. Got to have one. Well, I'll hug you before you leave. I ain't scared. And you don't know. Maybe frustration set in on you, and maybe anxiety set on you. But let me tell you something. You need to trust God. And if you're struggling with trusting him today, would you be big enough to say, you know what? I just need the prayers of the folks at church. I'm not asking if you're lost. I'm just saying you're struggling, and your brook's dried up, and you need help. And we're going to have a song of invitation here, and if you need to pray today, and if it's for you, pray for yourself. But guess what? There's some of us would love to pray along with you and just ask God to help you. If your brook's dried up, and you don't know what to do next, and you're frustrated, and you're confused, and maybe you're anxious about it, why don't you just come and let's pray together today. I'm not worried about social distancing around the altar. I think God can protect us here. I don't believe in going out and doing stupid stuff, okay? I believe God can protect us if you need to pray today. Would you come and pray if you need to as we stand and sing? What song, Brother Dan?
Number 437, verses 1, 2, and 5. When we walk with the Lord in the light of his word, what a glory he sheds on our way. While we do his good will, he abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Not a shadow can rise, not a cloud in the skies, but his smile quickly drives it away. Not a doubt nor a fear, not a sigh nor a tear can abide while we trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Then in fellowship sweet we will sit at his feet, or we'll walk by his side in the way. What he says we will do, where he sends we will go. Never fear, only trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey.